You're listening to the Turn Autism Around podcast, episode number 226. Today, I have my sidekick on the show, Kelsey General, who is our community manager. She's been with me and our community since 2016 when she joined our online course and community to help her firstborn son, Brenly, and then she helped her second son, and now she is helping all of us with our children and clients in our community. But once in a while, we do a classic rebroadcast, which we did last week for 225. We rebroadcast our episode on hyperlexia. And today, Kelsey is on the show asking me 5 of the top questions we get about hyperlexia, early reading, early fixation on letters, whatever you want to call it. It's happening frequently in the autism world, and we get a lot of questions. So today is all about that. Okay, Kelsey, we are back. We haven't done an frequently asked questions show for a while. So thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Mary. Good to be here. Let's get rolling on hyperlexia questions. It's a fun topic.
All right, awesome. What's our first question?
Well, what is hyperlexia? Maybe people who are listening are kind of like, what are they even talking about today?
Yeah. I didn't know what the term was either. And Lucas started showing signs of hyperlexia early on at the age of 2. And I think I talk about this a little bit in last week's episode. And he was very interested in letters. And I thought that was a good sign. So I was trying to piece things together. This was the late 1990s. The internet was just coming to be a thing in homes. I had my first AOL account. The web was just inching along. I mean, maybe those of you out there listening are computer geeks and we're like, well, no, that really happened in the 80s and early 90s. But actually in my home, we were just getting to the AOL account in 1999, 1998, when he first started showing signs. So I actually was searching back then for, letters and 2-year-old knowing letters or, and I came across the term hyperlexia. So what it is a hyperfixation on letters and numbers, but more so letters and words and reading before you can speak functionally. And I found this woman who was from the Hyperlexia Association, and I went over to her house and I called the Hyperlexia Association and I said, my son is 2 and he knows letters. And she said, does he have other signs of autism? She probably didn't say it that bluntly, but she's like, can he speak? Can he, and the answer was no, and she's like, well, you have to get him diagnosed with autism like that. I'm like, I don't want it to be autism. I want it to be hyperlexia. So, hyperlexia is just that. Now, there are 3 types of hyperlexia, and one of the types is early signs of giftedness with no developmental delay. So you could have hyperlexia without autism, but in most cases, it's a part of the brain that's kind of developing a scattered skill of a hyper focus on letters and reading. And I've had many clients who have had hyperlexia, whether it's diagnosed or not. It's kind of like it could be an early sign of autism, but it also, like I said, could be a sign of giftedness. It doesn't have to accompany autism, but if you have an interest in letters and reading, plus the other signs, delayed talking, delayed pointing, not sharing, not showing, no response to name or limited response to the name, not pretend playing when they should be, not putting words together when they should be. That coupled by hyperlexia or an interest in letters and numbers and early reading, then that is almost always autism.
Yeah, I know a lot of parents and people, when their 2-3-year-olds are reading and no letters, they, wow, they're such a genius. And it is such a cool skill to have, and it can be a beneficial skill. But yeah, when kids can read or know their letters but can't ask you for water, it's probably hyperlexia and potentially autism. And so that brings us to our next question, which is in line with this. And it says, is it a good sign, or is it a sign of autism, and should I be concerned, or does it mean they are a genius and gifted? And what can I expect?
Yeah, I think this is the biggest misconception. I just told you my story. I totally was in that camp of this means he is going to be okay, that he's going to be, I've had clients where their husband is an engineer, or their husband is, or they themselves are a scientist, or something very scientific and very academic. And then they're like, wow, my child can read. That means they're going to be like me. They're going to be a famous scientist, or they're going to be an engineer. And they take that as a very good sign. I'm not saying hyperlexia is a bad sign. Actually, interest in letters, reading, we can always use that skill. It's a good sign. It's fine. It just means that they probably have autism, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to also have intellectual disability, which happens in a quarter to a third of kids, maybe a half, if and so we need to utilize the skill, but not get into they're going to be fine and they don't need anything, or if they're going to go to regular preschool or regular general education, kindergarten, just because they know their letters and can read a couple words and they're probably more advanced in that specific little area, they're probably far behind in other areas. And we can't just go, oh, wow, I'm going to cross my fingers that this all works out, because they're showing you that they have some strengths in this area. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves, because really what we want to do is we want to back up and teach some words. So I had this one little boy, and you could tell he was very impaired. It took a lot for the parents to even consider autism. They were both highly technical. Mom was a physician, dad was an engineer or computer software person. And so, the child was rocking, the child was, non-speaking. He was 2, and but he was you could just tell he was very interested in letters, even though we didn't present letters or anything. And I said, I think he's reading. So what I did, and this is kind of how to tell, I know this isn't part of the story, but or part of the question, but I think it's helpful. So what I did was I wrote down apple on an index card, and I wrote down cat on another index card, and mommy on another index card. And we had pictures of these things, right? So I just put down 3 pictures, and then I didn't say apple. When I handed him the flashcard with apple, I just handed him cards of the names of the items, and he matched them perfectly, all 10 out of 10. It was clear that he could read the words without me saying what they were. So I was like, okay, all right. So I say to these two parents that are highly technical, now I just did that little experiment. We are not teaching him to spell or to read. We can't go down that rabbit hole and shape this up even farther. You know, this is not a problem, but we need to teach him to talk. We need to teach him to request his needs. So the next week I go and they have their Mac computer and they say, spell apple. And the kid's like, he's typing APPLE. And then spell bar, he like Barney, BARNEY. And he has a big smile on his face. He's looking over and the parents are thrilled. And I'm like, okay, what part of this did you not understand? Like, we are not teaching him how to spell and to read at 2. And the listeners out there maybe be like, well, Mary, that shows, it doesn't really show what we want. We need to catch the child up on requesting, on not banging his head while he's rocking, not getting aggressive, not, we need to teach him imitation. We need to teach him, language comprehension needs to be at the forefront. We need to teach him body part identification. We need to teach him so many things. And if you get into teaching to the splinter skills, it can a lot of times cause a problem.
Yeah. And I would say, with kids who are a little bit vocal, but only say letters or numbers, it is a good sign that they are talking, that they can make sounds, that they can make words. However, like you said, we just can't go down that rabbit hole, or it can quickly change from a good sign to really hard to undo. And now you have a kid who might be really resistant to saying any other words besides those words. And so it's a good sign that they have the ability to talk, that they motor. I mean, we've done a lot of episodes recently on like oral motor. So it's good they can physically make those sounds.
Yeah, I love that point. Like articulation, we just had Barbera on the show. We can link that in the show notes. But 1, 2, 3, those are 7, 8, 9. Those are 1 to 2 syllable words. They're common, A, B, C. They're very among the first sounds, like you're pointing out, Kelsey. We can see articulation. We can use letters and numbers as a reinforcer.
Mm-hmm.
I had a child who I started with, when he couldn't talk and everything, and we got him talking, and he was going to kindergarten, and he was going to go to general education kindergarten. He was doing really, really well. And he's one of the clients that I do not have permission to show any videos. So I never talk about him and or show videos, but he was going to kindergarten, and this child was really hyper focused on numbers, and to the point where he would obsess over the clock in the kitchen. Oh, it's 4:19. It's 4:19. Next is going to be 4:20. Like that kind of thing. So the mom would like cover up the numbers everywhere. But at the same time, she was also giving him number books and kind of, going into, it's a fine line. I mean, I've had kids obsessed with like Google Maps and baseball statistics. And, so this child was numbers everywhere. But I hadn't seen him for a month or 2 because he was going to go to kindergarten. And I met him at the kindergarten placement while they were taking the summer tour. And I was able to consult with him through like 2nd grade through the school, which was a very good thing. But during that kindergarten visit, he's like, Miss Mary, when's your birthday? And so I told him the date, and the year, and he goes, that was a Tuesday. And I was like, well, it is a Tuesday because another autistic individual told me I was born on a Tuesday when I gave them my full birth date. So I was just like, and then he's doing it with everybody. And so I say to the mom, like, when did this start? Like, like this wasn't something that I had seen before with him. I had seen it with other autistic adults. And she's like, yeah, we got him a bunch of calendars. He's really into that. I'm like, that's not what we, you know, and there might be people listening going, well, that's a splinter skill. That's their special skill. But it can also turn into, I've been with adults, not my clients, who it's like they go into it and then that's a cool skill. And then everybody's like, well, what is, February 3rd, 1955? And then they're, it's like, this isn't functional. And those people that I've seen, some of them have been fully conversation and fully functional, and it's just a kind of cool skill. But there's also been people that living in group homes and have this kind of skill too. So, in the end, I just don't think we want to, I did recommend to the mom that she pull back on, focusing on that skill, not give him, algebra books when he's in kindergarten, because he was, even though he was conversational to a point, he still needed language for learning, then language for thinking, then like he needed a lot of support. And if we go down this rabbit hole too much, it could cause problems.
Yeah. And it can make other people think a child has more skills than they do. And then you're not teaching to the assessment and missing skills, and then problem behaviors start happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
and that's what happened. Yeah.
That's exactly what happens. You think a child has this level of understanding because they're demonstrating it through reading, but really, reading and understanding what you're reading are two very different things, or understanding what you're actually doing when you're demonstrating that skill. Two very different things.
Yeah.
How can I get my child with hyperlexia to request their wants and needs? Because we're mostly a lot of people listening might have young toddlers or preschoolers, and they're saying all their letters or reading, but they aren't really requesting basic needs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So back in the fall, we launched a software, an assessment. I did a podcast episode on why we made the digital assessment and all kinds of things. We can link that in the show notes. But basically, you start with this digital assessment that takes you 10 minutes, and you need to find your child's or client's baseline in 10 minutes. Then you take that assessment, you turn it into a plan, and you start teaching. And teaching with a toddler or preschooler almost always involves the early learner materials like the shoebox and inset puzzles and those sorts of things. So if you have a child that knows all their letters and numbers, can read, it doesn't mean that you just, completely, like the mom did, cover up the clock in the kitchen and things like that. No, it's part of their lives and they like it. So even the inset puzzles, you have to be careful that they don't become too obsessive. So you want inset puzzles of animals and of vehicles and maybe letters, maybe numbers, inset puzzles of colors and shapes and those sorts of things. But you want to be rotating. So if you hold up an A and you have an inset puzzle and you don't say anything and they say A, you give it to them. That is part request or manned. It's part tact because they're labeling it. If you say it and they say it, it's part echo. It's following directions to put, they're sitting at the table, they're engaging. You don't want to be doing that straight for 15 minutes. Maybe you want to do, but like your point earlier, Kelsey, we know they can say it. They like to say it. It's part man because they want to put it in. We can use that just like we use video modeling. I did a recent episode on video modeling. we use video modeling at times to jumpstart language. We can use their interest in letters and numbers to also jumpstart language and to get them seated at the table, and to, maybe on the iPad, we put apps where it's you pull in the B, E, D, and the bed spins. We don't want the child doing that on their own obsessively, but as part of table time, engaging with us, that may be appropriate. But we will also need to have pictures of real items, have 3D items of farm animals, and so we need to use this, but also teach all the names of reinforcers, of important people. Oh, and really important when you are gathering the early learner materials, to get flashcards without letters or words on them, or to get cheap flashcards where you literally cut them off. So either you get like a language builder set without letters and words on the front, or you get cheap ones and you cut off the letters and the words. And you can keep those letters and words, don't trash them. You keep them for other things like matching the real bed with the picture bed or the picture of the word. But don't do that when they're 2 or 3 until you can get their language going. Really focus on the nouns that they need, then the actions that they need, and to build words. And, I know I'm saying this a lot, and, just trying to explain what we do. The procedures to get table time started are outlined in my book, Turn Autism Around. But they're step-by-step in our online courses and community, where you really can learn, because it's tricky, especially when you have a child who is obsessed or, interested in letters and reading, in order to find that balance, because it is a balance, it's a dance. And we don't want to stamp out their special skill or their interests, but we also need to get them to respond, not just talking wise, but also receptively, to follow directions, to understand. Because the boy that could type Apple and Barney and those sorts of things, he is, functioning. He has intellectual disability now, functioning more in line with where Lucas is, will need, probably 24-hour care. And, there's some pivotal parts of your life where you don't, like even I said with that little boy in kindergarten and first grade, where he was obsessively just over the summer asking about birthdays and kind of getting in that. And the school wanted to stop language for learning and thought he was fine in the classroom. And I was just like, this is a critical time period, that, kindergarten to second grade for this little boy. And we don't know if he's going to turn the corner and be able to be in high school without support and go to college and drive, or if he's going to need support, support to stay alone or live alone. So, not that we have any control over which way it's going to go. Like for your 2 boys, Kelsey, were they ever obsessed with letters and reading?
Lincoln, no. Lincoln detests reading.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. It's kind of, hyperlexia is the opposite of dyslexia. Not to say that he has dyslexia, but if he doesn't like reading or has trouble reading, it can be the opposite problem.
Yeah. And so Lincoln can read, and he is fully up to grade level now, but he does do 30 minutes twice a week with, Amy Evans, who's been on this podcast to do precision
in the show notes.
Yeah.
Amy Evans came on with Kelsey to talk about fluency programming with both her boys. So Lincoln is in what grade now?
Well, he's in grade 2.
Grade 2. And he has done, what'd you say, 30 minutes a day of fluency?
30, he does 30 minutes twice a week now. We put it down because he doesn't need as much, but he still needs that fluency training twice a week to keep up with his reading, because he just doesn't love it.
Okay.
And we do it other days at home too, but with Amy.
And
Yeah.
what about Brantley?
Brantley, I wouldn't say he was hyperlexic, but he did always have an interest in letters, and knowing letters. And we used a lot of ABC inset puzzles as reinforcers. So I would have all the pieces with me, and I would actually have an ABC puzzle on the table beside a farm puzzle, or beside the shoebox, or beside potato head. And I would do the potato head parts, I, and he'd put it in. And then, we might do that a few times, and then I would give him a letter.
Okay.
A, or he would request A, and he would get A. He wanted all the pieces to complete the puzzle. So we would use that as reinforcer a lot. And as he got to an age where we would teach him reading, we made sure not to do sight word reading, and really back up with him to phonics. And we took years teaching him all the components of reading. And now he can fully read any book. And he'll sound out words that he doesn't know using phonics. However, I decided to focus on that end first and then come up with the comprehension. He does understand what he reads in a very, very simple book. Technically, he could probably read a chapter book, but I wouldn't give him that. We read very simple books and ask very simple WH questions, because his comprehension is much lower than his actual decoding ability, which is at grade level he's technically in grade 3.
Yeah, it's a good point. We really need to build that comprehension. In my online courses, I have a book program that I developed to boost up comprehension. And basically, you want to get really simple books, like one line per book. Read it to the child or with the child. If the child can read, they can read it. But then before we move on to the next page, we need to get the child to answer questions. And this is obviously a child who can speak, they don't have to read. You could read to them, but it's not like, it's very simple books and very simple questions. And we want them to get 80% of the answers to our questions. So if the questions aren't basic enough, like what's this called, and they say cow, or if that's in their repertoire, so that's important to build comprehension. Because I think in last week's show I talk about another boy who was reading chapter books but had no comprehension of the passage he read about 9/11 on September 11th in like 2005 or 6 when I went to consult for the first time. The other thing you said, which triggered something else, was using the puzzle like a side of a farm puzzle. Is I used a puzzle, an inset puzzle with the letters, as reinforcers for a feeding program once for a child. So this was a child who only drank out of a bottle, only drank almond milk out of a bottle, and ate gluten-free crackers. That's it. Except for an occasional McDonald's fries if you drove through and had hot fries. And we took him to Keith Williams, who we've done a podcast with. We can link him in the show notes as well. He's an international feeding expert, a BCBA. But anyway, we used these so he would take a bite and then he would get a letter and build the puzzle. So we definitely want to use these skills and this interest to reinforce.
And then, so the next one is my child with hyperlexia scripts what they have read frequently and is very focused on that topic. What can I do?
Yeah, so scripting, I've done a lot of I've done podcasts, I've done video blogs. We can link those in the show notes. Scripting is stimming. It's again, it's not something bad. It's just that when you script or when you have it's just in the long run, scripting, if they're scripting at school, if they're scripting in their ABA program, it's like they're doodling and they're not paying attention. So we all stim, everybody stims, right? All of our leisure activities are stim behavior. You're shooting baskets in a net and you want to get it in. Okay, so that's a stim. Playing the violin and hearing the note. Ooh, that note's not right. Playing it better. That's all stimming. Even flipping through your phone on Facebook, or watching reality TV, or reading a novel. Those are all stim, self-stimulatory behavior. It's what we do to keep our mind active and busy and our neurons firing when no one's engaging us. However, excessive stimming and scripting is a problem, because if you are trying to engage a child, it'd be like me watching reality TV and I'm all into it, and then you're trying to get my attention to teach me, algebra. Like, I am focused on this. Or if I kept singing a song or saying the same thing over and over again, my mind I'm not available for learning. And the boy who was reading the September 11th passage from last week's episode, he was in 6th grade at the time, and he had a lot of scripting. It wasn't like scripting from a movie for one thing, but it was like I would call it nonsense language, because I went in and I was just like, oh my goodness, he's reading a passage, he has no comprehension. And he's saying things like, can I hop like a kangaroo? And he'd throw a ball and he'd say, stop throwing the ball. As he was throwing the ball, and he would say, Miss Mary has a striped shirt on, or Miss Mary has earrings on. And just like in the middle of us trying to teach him language for learning, like I was just like, oh my goodness, there's a lot going on here. And so I asked the staff to count how many nonsense languages he had per day, and it was 500. And they counted per interval. So in every 15 minutes, they would have a clicker, which I don't recommend counting problem behaviors with a clicker anymore, but these were the olden days when we counted everything with a clicker. And so if he'd say, Miss Mary has a striped shirt on, they'd click. If he'd say, can I hop like a kangaroo, they'd click. And then at the end of the 15 minutes of language arts, they would write down 43 they were basically defective demands for attention. And when I went back, it was like 500 a day. And the intervals, it was interesting because the intervals with next to no scripting or defective demanding were typing. And you think about typing, your brain, you're not saying, oh, the A key's here. Your mind, when you really type, like not the poke, hunt and poke kind of typing, but when you really type, your mind is trained to look, and your hands are going fluently without you thinking about it. But your mind has to be calm. You can't be scripting Miss Mary has a striped shirt as you're typing SD, whatever the things are. So what we did with this child is we increased the typing things. We really tried to calm him down from overly scripting. We got a VB program in place where he, because if he was labeling cards and doing mixed VB, he was good. And as he got older, as he was doing things that kept his mind busy, like focusing on learning a new skill at the Weiss Bakery, or focusing on something that kept him busy, his scripting was super low. So we used these kind of procedures to actually place him in work conditions where he wasn't scripting and perseverating, because you can imagine like him going to a restaurant to work as a busboy. It would be very disruptive to the patrons of the restaurant to have him, oh, I like your fries, oh, I like hamburgers, it's just like that wouldn't have been a good fit. But him working more in like a factory setting was a great fit, because he was a great worker and his mind was busy while he was working. And so I don't think we need to stamp out scripting if you're by yourself, and if the child is by themselves or watching a movie and they want to script and that's their fun, great. But in learning situations, we really need to, people in the intermediate course, I feature a little girl who had 90% of the intervals with scripting when I started with her. And, 3 years later, her scripting was pretty much gone. And people are like, well, how'd you do that? 3 years of great programming and great teaching and great reinforcement and great data collection, where we are not reacting to the scripting, just going, okay, what kind of things are best for learning?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, yes, when a child is alone and needs to be stimulated that way, and you have nothing else to stimulate them, that's good. But then looking at what skills can I teach, and what engages their mind enough to stop this. And also noticing, like, a 2-year-old scripting does not mean they're going to script forever. Again, it's a good sign that they're talking, that they have those sounds. And as you build skills and continue to build skills with good programming by using your assessment, it'll likely go down. The less they're allowed to just sit alone with their favorite books and read them over and over and over, and more time they're spent engaged learning at the table, the more you'll see that go down too, without you needing to do, some crazy intervention on the scripting.
Yeah. One of the things you just said was read the same books over and over again. A big part of my book program is actually to go to the library every week and to exchange books, so that we aren't getting the same repetitive, movies are the same thing. Now with iPads and electronics, it's very easy to have the child hyper focus on one video or one character of videos or one, so the more we can get them out of the same things over and over again, the better they're going to do.
Yes, exactly. So that brings us to our last question. Is it okay to use words, letters, and numbers in teaching, or what should the focus be? And I think we've answered that over and over today,
Yeah.
but any last thoughts on that?
And I think the younger kids, you have to think about, if you have a young child, like 2 or 3, think about the things that they're going to learn in 3-year-old preschool. They might have yellow is the week of, is this week's color, and go find yellow items in your house. And, instead of, you can pair the word yellow, but they probably aren't going to pair the words, banana. Like, try to tone it down. You don't want to teach them to read like a first grader when they're 2 or 3, because it's going to stand out as not necessarily a positive thing, especially if they don't have good sitting behavior, they don't have good language comprehension. If I had a 2 or 3-year-old, I'd be working on a lot of tolerating books being read, asking questions about the book, taking turns answering the questions, imitation, manding, those kind of early skills, because we can use this, we can use their interest, like we've talked about the whole show, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. And as the child ages, just watch for those forks in the road where you're like, we're really, memorizing too much of one thing at the expense of everything else. I mean, there's lots of adult autistic individuals who are really savants. I don't know that we've used that word, but for those of you who've watched the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman, and if you haven't, you should probably watch that. But there was, he was portraying an adult with autism who lived in a institution and was had savant skills, had special skills, and a lot of ability to do numbers at gambling resorts, and knew people's birthdays and knew the days they were born based on the date and year. So for every step, I would just say, what are grade 3 kids doing? What are third graders, 3-year-olds doing in preschool? What are 2-year-olds doing? And treat the delays. You use these strengths as really reinforcers, ability to assess their articulation and all kinds of things. But then we need to really teach their everything they need to know to get those weaknesses up, to get them functioning as highly as possible. And our goal for everybody is as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible. So use letters, use words, use whatever to get those 3 areas shaped up. But I think hopefully that was helpful in answering these questions. I think between last week's episode 225 and this week's episode of 226, I think we covered most of the big topics on hyperlexia. If you're listening and you have another hyperlexia question, you can always email us at info@marybarbera.com. But I would really encourage you to look at the online courses and community too, because we do talk about hyperlexia quite a bit there too.
Yeah, quite a bit for sure.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Kelsey. And have a good one, everyone. I'll see you, or you'll hear me next week, same time, same place.